Hello, everybody. This is Truth Seeker. I thought I'd try something a little different. I have this footage that I thought would be interesting to people. Back in 2011, when my wife and I were taking a drive out to one of our favorite hiking grounds, we passed a big sign sitting alongside the road on our way to the park that said Watchtower. And I was shocked. I looked and I couldn't believe it. I went back home after our hike and I checked the internet, and indeed, it was true. The Watchtower had bought the property that formerly belonged to International Nickel, that had for some years served as a evangelical Christian college, and is now the world headquarters for the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. Or I guess they call it now the world headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't even have anything that alludes to Watchtower, at least verbally or in a written fashion, at the new headquarters. So I thought this would be interesting for people to see where they're located, to understand a little about the area in which the Watchtower moved, and to give people an opportunity to see the Watchtower from a vantage point that they would not normally see it in, because many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses will never get the chance to see Watchtower anyway. So this gives them a chance to see it from a point of view that most people won't ever get to see it from. And I'll explain my own personal experience to some extent that on a visit that I took there about 1 year ago now with a friend of mine. So I hope you enjoy. Here we're going to start our tour a little south of where the Watchtower is located. Actually, we're taking off from my backyard over Greenwood Lake, and this is the Ramapo Mountain region. This is an old region that played a very important part in American history. This land was never developed. It was always kept rural. It was difficult. You couldn't farm it, and it was difficult land to develop. So it remained rural, and it's kind of a unique spot. We're only 45 miles from New York City, maybe 45-minute ride from the George Washington Bridge. Prior to the colonial times, this land was owned or really occupied by the Lenni Lenape tribe, which was an Algonquin-speaking peoples who lived in longhouses and had a semi-nomadic existence. They grew food, corn, squash, and hunted. During the summer, they would come up into these hills and set up camps and would hunt. And then in the wintertime, they would go back down into the lower regions along the Ramapo River and live in their longhouses in a communal setting. As we look north here, up the lake, we're looking towards New York. That ridge that you see that runs parallel to the lake is Bearfort Mountain. It has Abram Hewitt State Park. Most of that land is part of the park. And on that land, on top of that ridge, is the Appalachian Trail. And this part of the Ramapo Mountains is a link to the Appalachian chain to the north, the Adirondacks, the Catskills and Adirondacks to the north, all the way to Mount Katahdin in Maine. And to the south, through Pennsylvania, Blue Mountain, which turns into the Blue Ridge Mountains. And when you get to Virginia and North Carolina. And so this is sort of an intermediate link, even though these aren't very high, that ridge there has an elevation of maybe 1,300 feet above sea level. These are still part of the main spine of the Appalachian Mountains. This area has a long, long history in terms of Dutch colonial period before the English, and then the English, when they took over New Netherlands, New Amsterdam changed its name to New York, and this whole region here was very important from the perspective of iron. This was the iron-producing region for the United States for several hundred years, really. This was important for the British, and then later important for the Americans. During the Revolutionary War, it played an important role strategically. And also during the American Civil War, this was a critical iron-producing area. So until Minnesota became the main iron-producing region in the U.S. during the early 20th century, this was it. This is where all the iron came from in the United States. Now, our next little part here, or segment, coming up right here is we're just over the border. We stepped over the border into New York State. This is still the Ramapo Mountain region. It has a very distinctive look. These are very old mountains that go back 250 million years. They were at one time as high as the Rocky Mountains. We're approaching now the Watchtower and its campus. That lake that you see there is part of Sterling Forest State Park. It's called Blue Lake, or Little Sterling Forest Lake. But mostly known in the area as Blue Lake. It's not a natural lake. The whole region is dotted with lakes. They also call this area the Lakeland or Highlands region of New Jersey and New York. But the whole region's dotted with lakes. And at the end of this lake, you can see the main headquarters campus for the Watchtower. So this actually was footage that was taken in the autumn of 2017. So if you notice a difference in the color of the foliage, you notice some colors beginning to poke out. It was early October, but it was a very hot day. It was turbulent. You could see the water is shimmering. That means there was a pretty good breeze blowing. And at this altitude, there was a strong breeze. So this film is every so often a little jiggly because of the turbulence in the air. So we're coming up on the Watchtower Campus right now. For anybody who's wondering, the Watchtower does not own this lake. The entire area is surrounded by Sterling Forest State Park. So all of this wooded area is parkland. Watchtower only owns 250 or so acres of the land that you see here. Some of it has been kept in natural condition, but most of it's been developed. You can enter this campus, but you cannot just walk around freely. They very tightly control your presence on site. They have a little visitor center with a museum One that I didn't find particularly interesting because they had copies of old Bibles of every sort. They had a replica of the Dead Sea Scroll. Who's interested in a replica? I'd be more interested in seeing a real one, but they have that there. When I was there last year with my friend, some of you know very well. He has his own channel, and he's a wonderful person. But anyway, we really had fun actually in the historical section where Watchtower presents exhibits of its history. And they go back to Charles Taze Russell's day. They actually have his top hat and cape and his gold-handled cane and in a glass case. They have a very old Chart of the Ages. I grew up as a Bible student with the Chart of the Ages, and this was a cloth one that you hung on the wall. It had. I'm just guessing. I wish I could. I wish I had asked, but I suspect that this Chart of the Ages probably dated to the 1880s or 90s. It was very old. It was very old, and it was very different from ones that I've seen before, because it didn't have the pyramid and tabernacle on it. But rather the Jubilees were marked out on it. So it was interesting. It was on a blue field with white markings or lettering. Here we're coming, now the facility to the right that we're passing has nothing to do with Watchtower. That's a private industry that is located. That's a research and development facility. But we're coming upon Watchtower again, as you see in the distance at the end of the lake there. You can see the size of the campus. It's pretty good size. I understand that there are as many as 1,500 people, Jehovah's Witnesses, Bethelites, or I guess you want to call them. You never really get to see even the curtain, much less the man behind the curtain, when you take this tour. It's very hermetically sealed, was the description given to it. That you really, even though that they do have a guided tour around the campus, you don't see any of the real. You don't see the governing body. You don't see where they convene. You don't see. Yeah, I guess you might go by some of the dormitories, which are basically. I mean, if you've seen a college dorm, that's all it is. Directly below us, here at the bottom of the screen, is the main entrance into the main and only entrance. Well, actually, I stand corrected. There's another entrance for trucks, but that's the main entrance where everybody really goes in and out. That's a maintenance building, the utilities. This is the utility section here. The main campus is now fading. You can see the two tennis courts. I guess probably one of the governing body members plays tennis. Now we're looking to the south. That actually is where we're heading to next. Now, where we are at this moment, and this is looking north now towards the Watchtower. They're just over that ridge. This area here is Ringwood State Park. Ringwood Manor is located here. This was the home of Robert Erskine initially, who was the map maker of George Washington during the Revolutionary War. And Peter Hans Cleaver lived here. He was an early iron entrepreneur in this area. This was all dotted with iron mines and furnaces, old furnaces. Within a few miles of here, there's what they call Monksville Iron Works that was owned by Abram Hewitt. This whole estate, Robert Erskine is actually buried here. There's a tree. George Washington had been to this estate. And there's a tree, the remnant of a tree called the Washington tree, that apparently George Washington had planted. I guess that's the rumor. But the last stump of it was left. This is where the famous chain was made that was prevented the British ships from going up the Hudson River. If you know anything about American history, there was these huge iron links, giant links. They floated them across the Hudson River near West Point, and they have some of these iron links here. They have cannon. Abram Hewitt bought this property just before the Civil War. He was the mayor of New York at one time. And Abram Hewitt, there's the house itself, pretty much in the way that Abram Hewitt put it together. It was an evolutionary process building that house over a 200-year period. It's now a museum and donated with all of the original artifacts in it that Abram Hewitt owned. Abram Hewitt provided the Union Army with all the iron it needed from this region for making the guns, making cannons, making cannonballs, and as recognition for his contribution to the war effort after the war, the Union, I guess it was Congress and President Andrew Johnson, awarded Abram Hewitt a collection of Civil War guns that were used during the Civil War. As you enter the foyer of this Ringwood Manor, it's ringed with rifles and guns that were used during the Civil War. That was at one time the largest collection of Civil War guns that existed. The family is related to Peter Cooper, and related to Cooper Union University, which is a highly rated, highly reputed engineering college in New York City. In fact, my good friend and supervisor's son went to Cooper Union as a young man. He's now working and married and so on, as people do. But this is the beautiful Ramapo region, and Watchtower really just doesn't fit into this area. You know, I understand they purchased this property in 2009, which they were talking about buying this property for some time before that. There's no question about that. They were looking for an exit out of New York. And I think because Brooklyn was so close to where 9/11 took place, they could readily see the devastation and the damage as it was happening from Brooklyn headquarters to where the World Trade Center was, which was just across the bridge and a narrow section of Manhattan Island. So I think that scared the living daylights out of the governing body. You know, why would we want to be here when Armageddon begins? And, you know, they're so freaked out by Armageddon that I honestly think that they wanted to move out of the region so that they could be in an isolated spot and away from where all the trouble would be when all hell breaks loose during Armageddon. Now, how much faith does that take in Jehovah to do that? I can't think of any other reason why they had been in Brooklyn for 100 years. They owned those buildings outright. They weren't paying any taxes, and it wasn't costing them anything to be in New York. And they had been there for over 100 years, a part of that community. They were entrenched there. What I'm saying, I guess, is that they didn't display a whole lot of trust in Jehovah to save them out of Armageddon by moving out to this isolated area so remote from New York City. So, anyway, I hope this tour was a little something different and something that you enjoyed, and I wish you all the best.